Hello, Algebra 1. This lesson is all about fractions, decimals, and percents. I know this is a subject that you've studied before. You know that you can translate. You can turn a fraction into a percent. You can turn a fraction into a decimal. Likewise, you can turn a decimal into a fraction or a decimal into a percent. If you look at the number of arrowheads here, you're going to find that there are 6 different directions that you can go in. I've noticed in this class, and I've noticed in previous years, that this skill of translating from fractions to decimals to percents and so on is one that almost every Algebra 1 student could use some work on. So we're going to concentrate on that in the lesson today. Okay, before we go any farther, let's make sure that we understand what percent means. The way I explain it is I say percent is comparable to per century. Most of us know that century is equivalent to 100, so it literally means per 100. As the textbook says, percent means divided by 100. Now, whether you call it per 100 or divided by 100 doesn't matter, as long as you go from 53% to 53 per 100 or divided by 100. So let's apply that. Let's look at this example here. The textbook says, what if I had 100 little squares? An easy way to draw 100 squares is to do 10 on a side times 10 across the bottom. If you made a picture like this, you'd find that you'd drawn 100 squares yourself. If you shaded in 53 of them, that's another way of showing 53%. Notice, you know probably that 50% is half. Notice that a little more than half, 3 percentage points more than half, is shaded. Okay. First direction for translations, from percent to fraction. The textbook explains, and by the way, all of these explanations are on pages 784 and 785 of the textbook. It explains that to write a percent as a fraction, well, first of all, they say, let's do that in lowest terms. Let me go back and point out, I said, write your fractions in simplest form. My words, simplest form, their words, lowest terms, mean the same thing. So to write a percent as a fraction, first write the percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100. Then see if you can simplify. Examples. The first one, 71%. 71 per century, or 71 out of 100. This one's done. I can't simplify any farther. I want you to try B, C, and D, turn them into fractions, and see if you can simplify them farther than the first fraction you come to. Hit the pause button, and then come back. Okay, I'm going to assume you paused, you've solved B, C, and D, and you're ready now to see the answers from the book. 10% becomes 10 out of 100, or 10 per century, but that can be simplified down to 1 out of 10. And if you don't automatically see that, notice that what you could have done is canceled those zeros. And notice I've now got 1 out of 10. That's one quick and easy way to simplify a fraction. 4%, becomes 4 out of 100. This time I can't cancel zeros, but still I can simplify. 4 and 100 are both divisible by 4 and turn into 1 out of 25. Another way to see this is to realize that 1 out of 25 is 1/4, and 1/4 of 100, there are 4 quarters in 100 pennies. 350%. It's going to be 350 out of 100, or per century. This time, again, I can simplify it down. Let me show you again. This time I can cancel the zeros. I've got 35 out of 10, but I would not even accept that as a final answer. You can keep going. 35 out of 10 is the same thing as 7 over 2. I'm okay if you stop here, but if you want to keep going and turn it into a mixed number, 3.5, either of these two answers is an acceptable final answer to me. Let's move on. Translating from percent to decimal. To write a percent as a decimal, move the decimal point 2 places to the left. Then remove the percent symbol. It's literally only those 2 steps. Move the decimal point 2 to the left, remove the percent symbol. Move the decimal 2 to the left, get rid of that percent symbol. I want you to do the same thing with B, C, and D. They're a little bit harder. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've done it. Here are the answers. To move the decimal 2 to the left, well, there is no number in front of the 3, but you can always put zeros in front of numbers if you want to. So I've put that there, and now I've got 0.03, and that's my answer, without the percent sign in there any longer. 427%. Well, remember, my decimal's right there. So when I move that decimal 2 to the left, 4 is still in front of the decimal, and 4.27 is my answer. 4.27 is the same thing as 427%. Last one, 12.5%. Move it to the left, and I've got 0.125. 0.125 is the same as 12.5%. Now let's translate from decimal to percent. To write a decimal as a percent, basically just do the opposite of what we did on the last slide. Move the decimal this time 2 places to the right and add the percent symbol. So as an example, I move this 2 over and I've got 93. I add the percent sign and I've got 93%. Go ahead and do B, C, and D. Okay, I'm going to assume that you did that. I move that decimal 2 places to the right. Now I've got 147. I add the percent sign and it's 147%. 147% is the same as 1.47. For C, move 2 to the right, and now I've got 2.5, and I add the percent sign. For this last one, I move it 2 to the right, and I've got 0.5%, which is the same as 0.005. Okay, next translation, from decimal to fraction. To write a decimal as a fraction in lowest terms, first write the decimal as a fraction with the denominator of 100. In other words, take the number that you have and put it over 100. Then simplify if possible. So for example, 0.73 is the same thing as 73 out of 100. Can't go any farther, just like a few slides ago I couldn't go any farther with 71 out of 100. I want first for you to put these as fractions and then over 100 and then see if you can simplify further. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've done B, C, and D for yourself and you're ready to see these answers. 0.25 becomes, 25 over 100, or 25 percent per 100. This can be simplified down. You know that 25 cents out of $1 is 1/4, and there it is in mathematical language. 0.05. Put that 5 over 100, right? Because remember, that's my tens place, that's my hundreds place. So I've got 5 100s. Here I've got 7 tens, 3 hundreds, or together I've got 73 hundreds. Here I've got 2 tens, 5 hundreds, or in other words 25 hundreds. This time I've only got 5 hundreds. I don't have any tens. But notice that 5 100s can be further simplified to 1/20th. Here I'm going to end up with 275 over 100, but I can do it an even easier way, and I like what the textbook has shown here. If you have numbers to the left, or in other words in front of the decimal, then when you go through this process of making it a fraction, you can leave those numbers and you can make a mixed number if you want. So you can leave that 2 here. You don't have to make it part of the fraction. The 75 goes over 100, and this you can simplify down because you know that 75 cents out of 100 pennies is 3/4. Next translation, from fraction to percent. Okay, there are 2 slides for this one. I've crossed out the last instructions and they'll come on the next slide. If you're going to write a fraction as a percent, it's simple when the denominator of the fraction is a factor of 100. Perfect if it's 100, but also perfect if it's 25, perfect if it's 10, or if it's 5. So let's look at an example. In this case, 25. 17 out of 25. Well, to make this out of 100, I'd multiply that by 4. So similarly, I would multiply 17 by 4. I'm not changing the ratio if I do that. 17 out of 25, if I multiply top and bottom by the same number, in this case 4, I haven't changed the fraction, I've just rearranged it. So I've got 25 times 4 is 100, 17 times 4 is 68. Now it's easy to see the percentage. 68 per 100 is 68%. But what about when you can't, when it's not a factor of 100? If that doesn't happen, then you're going to have to divide. 2 examples given in the textbook, 1 out of 8, that 8 is not a factor of 100. 1 out of 6, likewise, not a factor of 100. You got to divide. Whether you do this with pencil and paper or whether you do it with a calculator, you should find that 1 divided by 8 is 0.125, and 1 divided by 6 is 0.1666, with the 6's continuing forever. But I want to make these into percents. Well, 0.125, go ahead and hit the pause button, see if you can do it. Okay, 0.125, you should have made that into 12.5%. Second one, 0.1666, and the 6 is repeating. That should have turned into 16.6 repeating forever percent, or rounding it, notice they say approximately, 16.7%. Next slide. There are some situations you're going to have to memorize. They're going to come up so often in your life that you really ought to know these. For example, you ought to know that 1 out of 100, which is 1 penny, for example, is the same thing as 1%, or 1 century, is the same thing as 0.01. If I start you at any of these places, if I told you 0.01, you should know that's 1 out of 100. You should know that's 1%. Similarly, 1/3. It's a number that's very familiar to you. You should know that 1/3 is the same thing as 33 1/3%. It's the same thing as 0.3 repeating forever. So all of these, what are there, 12 here, these 12 different relationships I'm going to expect you to memorize. They're all on page 785 of your textbook, so make sure you've done that. One other thing the textbook doesn't cover. For some reason they don't talk about fraction converted into decimal. But actually they sort of do. Look at B and C. These are from 2 slides ago. We turned 1/8. Ultimately we turned it, I've cut that off, it was over here. We turned 1/8 into a percent, but on the way we did 1 divided by 8. Whether you use a calculator or do it with pencil and paper, you figured out that 1/8, or 1 divided by 8, was 0.125. So you actually did turn that into a decimal. And likewise, this one you turned into a decimal. What about this last one here? What about this last example here, 17 over 25? That never got converted into a decimal. We stopped at 68 over 100 and went straight from there to make it into a percent. But you can turn 68 over 100 into a decimal. It's simply 0.68. So whether you're doing it pencil and paper or fraction, pencil and paper or calculator into a decimal, or whether you're doing it by working from the fact that it's a multiple of a factor rather of 100, you should be able to go from fraction to decimal, and I'm going to expect you to be able to do that. Okay, that's it for the lesson. Your homework tonight is to fill out this chart. You can download it actually from my website. Notice I give you 75%, turn that into a decimal and into a fraction. I give you 2/3, turn that into a decimal and a percent. I give you 0.2, turn that into a fraction and into a percent, and so on. There are, what, 12 empty spaces here, I think. So I'm going to expect 12 answers. You can simply print this out and fill it in. I'll see you next class.